I'm Kurt Polish with the Madison ModPo meetup group, and we are going to discuss the poem Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens. I am joined by Jim Roseberry, Rogers, Scott, Louis, and we just want to note that our friend Martha Kaplan, dealing with illnesses and such, could not join us today, so we're thinking of her, and I guess we'll dedicate our session to her and keep her in our thoughts. So with that, I'll turn it over to Louis, who's going to lead us in discussion of Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens.
How many of you are really familiar with Wallace Stevens? Have you all read Wallace Stevens?
Absolutely.
I think I mentioned to you that when I worked for the Zoological Society, we had a black fellow that was in the Human Resources Department, and I always thought he was really a lightweight. And I saw him walking around with a book by Wallace Stevens, and it changed my whole perception of
Well,
him.
just briefly then about Wallace. He was an amazingly interesting man. In a quotation, geniuses have the shortest biographies, and that's a quotation of Emerson. He was born in Reading, Pennsylvania, 1879. His father was a lawyer, and his mother was, I don't know. He went to Harvard, but he was admitted as a non-degree special student. And I don't know that he got a degree from Harvard. And he was the editor of the Harvard Literary Magazine, so he achieved quite a bit at Harvard, but I don't think he got a degree. He wanted to be a poet. He moved to New York after Harvard, and he couldn't make a living as a poet. He knew he went into journalism. He didn't succeed in journalism, and so he became a lawyer, which is what a lot of people who don't know what else to do. Nobody's a lawyer.
As a retired lawyer,
I'm sorry. I have
a
a
mild
son that was
exception to your
an
remarks.
English major, couldn't figure out what to do with English major.
Don't
He's a
take
lawyer,
it personally.
But there is,
Anyway,
I can just speak very briefly, though, there is a connection with lawyers and the use of language
Oh,
and
yes.
Oh,
words,
yes.
Yeah.
and it does fit very nicely with an
Absolutely,
interest in poetry.
absolutely. So at any rate, he went to law school, and then he practiced corporate law while in New York, and then he hooked up with an insurance company in Connecticut, and he went there and he lived the rest of his life there, and he became quite successful as a indemnity guy, and he was quite well known all over the insurance industry as a really good indemnity fellow. He made good money, but he was never wealthy in the term of being very wealthy, but he was comfortable. He married a woman who was a stenographer, and his wife, his family disowned him. After he married her, they never talked to him again, because his dad had hopes that he would be in upper New York society and marry in and, do that, and he didn't. Then he never got along with his wife. He had one daughter, Holly, and Holly is interesting in that she edited his collected stories. I have his book here, collected poems, and she is the model for the woman on the dime, the Mercury dime, and she's also the model of Liberty walking on the 50-cent piece. Because she lived in the apartment where the guy who designed these things were, and he took a shine to her, and he used her image for these two things. So if you have a Mercury dime in your collection, or a Liberty $50, that's his daughter. And he won a Pulitzer in 1955, and very quickly, he often went to Key West. This is about the only other place he went from Harvard. He vacationed in Key West. At one time, he had a bar fight with Hemingway, and Hemingway knocked him out, out in the street. He fell into a puddle, quote. And he also argued extensively with Robert Frost, who also vacationed at this posh resort that he went to. And he died of stomach cancer in 1955. So that's interesting, and there's a lot more interesting things about him. He wrote a lot of his poetry in tercets, so that means that each time he started a new stanza, he had to start over, which is interesting. Quote, he's a poet of aloneness, but he was never lonely. And in my estimation, several of the important things about poems in general are that they must sound satisfying, they must have a good ear, they must appeal to the mind in some way, maybe not rationally, but appeal to the mind in some way, and then appeal to the heart, have some sort of impact on emotions. And he did all of those things very, very well. Sunday Morning is a long poem for this outfit, but the major considerations of this to me were that it's two things. It's certainly a masterly crafted poem. It's in perfect pentameter. I couldn't find an error. I don't know if anybody wanted to go through it and try to find an error, but every one I counted is absolutely in pentameter. It has a rhyme scheme. Not a scheme, but it has lots of rhymes. There's no scheme, but there are lots of rhymes. Lots of assonance, and lots of the other word, sibilants and sounds that go together, even though he doesn't rhyme. And then the other aspect of this beautifully crafted piece of art, actually, is the content. And this poem really considers the most important thing that a sentient, cognizant being can contemplate, and that is there anything after we're gone? Is there something for us after we're gone? Are we really gone, or are we gone? And to contemplate contemplate eternity and being absent for eternity is something you can't comprehend. One of the best written contemplations of this, I think, is Emily Dickinson's poem, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. A beautiful, beautiful statement of what death maybe means. And this poem is also a statement of that. And it makes you contemplate that. Why is it a modern poem? Can anybody tell me from reading this poem why they think it's a modern poem rather than just a poem? I mean, he was born in the 1800s. What makes this poem modern?
Well, isn't he sort of considered one of the Images poets?
Well, there you go. There's certainly a lot of images, aren't there?
That's a sort of poetic group that
Right.
includes.
He uses images extensively, and color, and objects that sort of like the Dr. Poet. Things that most poets, a lot of the old-fashioned poets certainly wouldn't be writing poetry about.
Yeah, I would say it's not so much an images poet, because that would be a concentration on just images and allowing the images to speak for themselves. But I would say that it's definitely a brilliant use of imagery,
Right.
and how the images repeat in the poem, that he'll come back to them. So I think Roger's observation is and it is good to emphasize those
Right.
imagery aspects of the poem. And as to the issue of whether it's modern, it doesn't follow. It follows a blank verse, but it doesn't, there are no specific received forms that he's writing in. So that part he's making up on his own. I think as well, the emphasis on the personal, that this is a reference to a specific individual, she, whoever she may be, is perhaps another aspect. But beyond that, I've got those two observations to
Well,
myself.
he certainly is not 100% a modern poet, because he also follows a lot of the conventions of conventional poetry, and he does it beautifully and almost perfectly. So it's not free verse by any means, and it's very well crafted. I'm just going to say a couple things about two of the many verses in it, and then we can discuss more if you want to. Get myself together here. The first stanza is simply beautiful imagery, and it also is very profound. And this is a woman who is of some means, and it's Sunday, and she's getting up rather late, and she perhaps is thinking about going to church. And so we know she's wealthy, or that she has money, because she has cockatoos, she has oranges, and she's in the sun, and I believe she is at a place where she can look out and see the ocean. I think she has a apartment or someplace where she can see the sea.
If I could jump in, the
Sure.
The cockatoo, whether these were real cockatoos or whether merely a pattern of the design of the rug, I read that critics actually have debated that. That, you know, that there's some element of uncertainty there, but
My sister owns 2 cockatoos, and they're part of the family, and so it wouldn't surprise me at all that she had a cockatoo, because a lot of people do like, they're neat pets, they really are.
and the fact that the poem is titled Sunday Morning very strongly emphasizes that notion of going to church.
Absolutely.
And this woman is not in church.
Right.
But
And she's considering, why not? I mean, why shouldn't she go to church?
well, and I like how the comforts that he lays out in the first lines. You've got your,
Right.
you know, peignoir, you know, this comfortable attire that she's wearing. She's got her coffee, her oranges. It's the sun, and there's this nice green freedom of the cockatoo, and those wonderful pieces of her life dissipate the holy hush of ancient sacrifice.
From a poetic standpoint, I think the first 2 lines are perfect examples of compression. I mean, you can tell by these few words, you can have a pretty good idea of who this woman might be, or at least you can form an image of her. Complacency of the peignoir, complacency of the peignoir, and late coffee. You know, some people get up and have coffee, and some people get up slowly and goof off, and then they have coffee, and that's what this implies.
I also like the encroachment of that old catastrophe, and whether the old catastrophe is death or the death of Jesus,
Christ.
the death of Christ. Either way, I mean, you're right in the depth of this powerful contemplation about death, religion, and life.
And the fact that I think that he is by the sea is that the sea is, you know, mentioned and referred to several times, and I had trouble with this as a calm darkens among water lights. But then if you think of looking out of an apartment or something, looking out into the ocean and seeing the waves break, there are water lights. There's lights on the water that you might be looking at.
And it's also stilled for the passing of her dreaming feet over the seas to silent Palestine, dominion of the blood and
Right.
sepulchre. So it brings to mind the story of Jesus walking upon the waters. It also shows that there is that life or that way of living available to her.
Sure, the compression in this is that she obviously understands and is intimate with Christianity. This is something that just comes to her
But
easily.
but the experience is beyond the pew.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And these images of things that are wonderful and living, she knows. The pungent oranges, bright green wings, and wings appears later and is used as an image in the poem. But the pungent oranges, bright green wings, seem things in some procession of the dead, as if she's aware that everything here is going to pass. All these beautiful images are beautiful things in my life aren't going to be here forever.
Yep. And just filling your mouth with the sound of these things is really wonderful. Pungent oranges and bright green wings winding across wide water without sound. The day is like wide water without sound. It's just the sounds of it. It sounds really good to the ear, to my ear, at any rate.
What's the contrast to divinity must live within herself?
Where are you?
Middle of the second.
Second stanza. Have to get that out because it seemed so long that I knew we weren't going to talk about all of it.
Well, I kind of hope, if there's time, I hope we can kind of touch on things.
Oh yes, no, we must touch on it. I just wasn't going to go into any detail other than let you folks tell me what you thought about. What was your question about?
I think that to answer Jim's question about look to what precedes it. So why should she give her bounty to the dead? I read as literally, why should she be giving money to the church?
Right.
Yeah, or even her thoughts and why should she be concerned that much? She's certainly not dead by any means.
There's a question of the power of the religion and its story. What is divinity if it can only come in silent shadows and in dreams? In other words, what's the deal? There's, God isn't among us.
Go to mass and oftentimes the church is old and it's kind of dark and it's kind of echoey and that's not very pleasant.
And so in contrast, she's thinking, well, okay, so there's that aspect of religion, but there's a lot better things going on here, right?
Right.
The right now, the comforts of the sun, the pungent fruit, the bright green wings, again, wings. So aren't they things to be cherished, like the thought of heaven? So those things have at least a power that is as great and meaningful as the thought of heaven. Not even heaven, but the thought of heaven.
And they're immediate. They're things she's perceiving right now and not some, theologic constructs that would be so much more, let's say, distant to her.
So rather than this crossing the waters, to get to Jim's question now, rather than crossing the waters or having this concept of God in our thoughts, this poet now is saying divinity must live within herself. That's where there is a notion of religiosity, a notion of we ourselves are divine. And I'm struggling with the words here to get that across. But divinity lies within human beings. After all, we're the ones that think it out. but beyond that, we're the ones who live this life where there's all this richness to behold.
And the concept of divinity, she later develops quite well the concept of what divinity really is or what it means to her. And of course, people that are devoted and, should I say, devoted is the best word I can think of, to Christianity, you can't be a Christian unless Christ comes into you, right? You have to accept Christ into you. That's one of the tenets of basic Christianity. So I think it's referring to that as well.
No, yeah, I'm not so sure, because if you look at the colon, how does divinity get defined here? It's passions of rain, moods and falling snow, grievings and loneliness, or unsubdued elations when
Right.
forest blooms, gusty emotions on wet roads on autumn nights,
Right?
all pleasures, all pains. So that's where that's
her
divinity.
divinity. That's
Yeah,
what
that's the
divinity
heart
is
of
to her.
life itself.
Right.
That's what's divine.
Not some ancient myth in another country.
Yeah. Does that sound right to you, Jim?
Sure. You said it well.
And with all these pleasures, the poet writes, come all the pains. As I guess everyone in this room can attest to.
She repeats this line, death is the mother of beauty.
Well, we're going to get to that because that's the nut of the poem.
Yeah.
If you believe that, there are, I think, people who don't believe that, but at any rate, that's one of the nuts of this poem.
Okay.
The key question of the poem is the blood of paradise, and shall earth seem all the paradise that we shall know? So that's the question of this poem. That's the basic question this poem asks. And then the answer is, the key statement is, death is the mother of beauty.
Yes.
So that we're into the third stanza then. And I would just note at the beginning, he contrasts Job in the clouds, had his inhuman birth, no mother suckled him, no sweet land gave him motions to the smithy mind. He moved among us as a muttering king. And I took that almost as a slap to say, hey, look, this guy was among us, Job, that myth. Whereas in Christianity, those are just thoughts that come in your dreams.
Yeah, it's about as much connection as if some king, rode through your town. He certainly was not personal to her at all. Her concept of God.
Well, and he also writes at the end of that stanza, he's talking about, well, is earth going to be all the paradise that we know?
Right.
The sky will be friendlier than that now. And I took that perhaps to mean we have in a Christian notion, we have a separation of the heaven and earth, and that the sky, therefore, that image of the heaven, will be friendlier, and we won't be divided. The sky will be friendlier than now, part of labor, part of pain, and next in glory to enduring love, not this dividing and indifferent blue.
I was hoping somebody would help me with that.
So that's what I think
have a hard
is,
time with those four stanzas.
and that's why I think it's a reference to heaven. Right? If heaven is some notion of above us, we're divided in Christianity between heaven and the earth, between heaven and the living.
What is she referring the now to? If not now, then what is she? It will be friendlier sometime
Mm-hmm.
Then now, what time is she talking about? I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't figure the references there in this last four stanzas.
Well, others might want to jump in. I just came back to that it's she's feeling, she still has this notion of Christianity in her head. That's what she's thinking of as now. But if she can, these are my words, but if she can overcome that concept of heaven up there, life down here, things will be friendlier.
Things will be better.
Yeah.
Somehow. Okay, that's, I questioned that, and of all of this poem, I had the most difficulty understanding those 4 or 5 lines. And then, of course, the next stanza is why this is really such a great place. And she mentions the common things we can perceive, and especially warm fields and birds. And in these things, the grave she doesn't understand, or it doesn't play a part. But one of the most beautiful sections of the whole poem, I think, is nor any chimera of the grave, neither the golden underground, nor isles melodious, all these myths, where spirits gat them home, all these religious myths, no visionary south, no cloudy palm, remote on heaven's hill, that has endured like April's green. Isn't that? That's just, to me, how can you state the contrast between the perceptive earth and religious myths? I really love that.
Mm-hmm.
That thought. And all of us, we're gonna see, for lucky, April's green pretty soon.
There you
And
go.
I'm looking forward to it. I don't know about you,
Yeah.
but I can hardly wait for April's green. And I think she was thinking the same thing.
Mhm.
There's nothing quite
Wake up, look around you.
Geez, yeah, where, winter is broken, winter is over, and April is such a magnificent thing.
The cruelest month.
Yeah.
Marvelous month. And then we come to the next stanza, which what the outstanding words are: death is the mother of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes into this.
But she's still thinking about, I can feel the need, but in contentment, even though I love all this stuff, I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss.
Yeah.
So there's a longing there for wanting.
In contentment, I'm still not quite content.
Mm-hmm.
I need something of imperishable bliss. But then she goes through these things.
Stirring leaves.
And
Well, there has
you know,
to be.
it's
Things have to
imperishable.
They have to be perishable.
That's right. If
In
it's
order for
imperishable,
there
it's no
to
damn
be
good.
beauty,
Yeah,
there has to be winter to precede
that's right.
spring.
The fruit has to come off the vine. It has
Yeah.
to shrivel up and
That's
come
right.
off the vine.
That's
The
right.
river has to get to the sea.
That's
It
right.
can't just be perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
And if something is perfect, then it's not right. It's not worthwhile. So
And I think you were touching on the 6th stanza. So what would paradise be like if things were imperishable?
right.
Does ripe fruit never fall? Do the boughs hang heavy in the perfect
We're gonna
sky,
go to that.
unchanging?
Perfect statement.
Will rivers never reach the seas? So it's almost, if that's the vision of heaven, it just doesn't really work.
Yeah. Do you want to live there? Do you want to live in a place where there's this gorgeous, beautiful fruit, but you can't enjoy it because it never comes to fruition? in this stanza, I wanted to bring up a song, since I like to compare things, of Kate Wolf. Does anybody know who Kate Wolf is?
No.
No.
You don't know? Hey, Kate Wolf was a folk singer in the 70s and 80s. Wrote and did beautiful, beautiful songs, and died of breast cancer when she was less than 40.
No, why?
But one of her songs is California. California, the fruit hangs heavy on the vine. There is no gold in California, I thought I'd warn you. And the hills turn brown in the summertime.
Sure do.
So that stanza brought that to me.
Sure, it's a
Another
good image
statement
of what he's driving
imperfection.
at.
Imperfection,
And impermanence.
right. And in order to have the beauty, I mean, has any of you ever lived where you were in the California hills, so you know what
Sure.
that means. In the spring, they're beautiful, and there's poppies and
That's right.
flowers, and
Green,
it's really gorgeous.
lush.
But come August, man, it is
It's
brown
a desert.
Sear, just
Yeah.
sear.
Mhm.
And that's an example of death being or imperfection adding to the beauty of things. Well, then my last statement, or my last thing was, this is the last line. Since this is a story, really, and she asks these questions, and then in the 8th stanza, she kind of answers this thing. She hears upon that water without sound, and that's, I think she's looking still out of her window, but that's certainly just my belief. And there's a voice that cries, what? The tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering. It is the grave of Jesus where he lay. And thereby she's denying the resurrection. I take this to believe.
I echo that.
Okay. Pardon?
I would agree.
That's right.
Okay, and so that being denied, then since that's the basic tenet of Christianity, then all the rest of this, we live in an old chaos of the sun. Again, compression. How did the earth form? What's the moon? All these things coming out of the sun, all is implied in that. We live in an old chaos of the sun, an old dependency of day and night. What can be more descriptive of earth, of the way the earth behaves, than the fact that there's always day and night, because it's turning, never stops. Or an island of solitude, unsponsored free of that wide water. Deer walk upon our mountains, and quail whistle about us their spontaneous cries. And if you lived in Chico, you probably saw mountain quail,
Oh, yes.
and you probably saw deer running in the woods. I certainly camped many times near Chico, actually,
Sure.
and saw all those things. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness. I've eaten wilderness blueberries in Alaska, and they're wonderful. Just along the trail, you reach down and you can pick blueberries.
Blackberries.
Yeah, and blackberries, right. And the isolation of the sky, and then this final thing that really personifies, living on Earth. And we've all seen, I think we've all seen pigeons getting ready to roost for the night, and they circle, and then gradually one or two drop down, and the others follow, and they end up wherever they're going to be for the night. And that's the end of the poem.
I'd like. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
No,
Go
go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to offer. He captures in those last lines death and life together so well. In the image of the pigeons, they make their ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings, as if there's that image of being aloft and free. But there's also death, just like Dylan Thomas, singing my chains like the sea.
Yeah.
This is a wonderful magisterial poem. I thank you so much for bringing to our
I'd like
attention.
to again connect this with one more thing. I really love Emily Dickinson. I think she's one of the better human beings that ever was on this earth. That may be overstating it, but that's what I believe. Anyway, in her wonderful poem on death, she also evinces the same thought in that where was she headed? Where were the horses headed at the end of that poem? Do you remember, anybody? No? The horses were headed to eternity, not to some place where she was going to be reincarnated, or that there was some place where they were headed. They were headed to eternity, and she was with them. So I don't believe she thought that she would ever be reincarnated or be in some kind of heaven.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say. So, any discussion on any of this? A truly beautiful poem.
Well, thank you for, Wallace Stevens is somebody that I don't feel like I want to just pull a book of his poems down and sit down and read them quickly, because I don't have that. I mean, these are poems you have to really pay attention to, and the same with,
Well, he's certainly a diametric opposite to the first fellow that we.
Allen Ginsberg?
Yeah, Stevens had the tremendous ability to live in two worlds. He was, he was as facile and as accomplished in prose as anybody could be. He wrote prose for money. That's what he did. And yet he also had a house of poetry, and I believe his house of poetry was indeed a bit nicer than his prose.
And he would write his poems walking to and from work,
To and from work.
and dictate to his secretary.
Is that how he did
the
it?
poems.
I didn't know how he did it on
I just
paper.
read
Maybe
that.
he went home and wrote them. I never.
Yeah, I wrote that recently. And then what happened to them after that, subject to revision and choice, but. So, thank you.
Thank you all for
Lovely. Monday.